Hey, it's Stereo Police. Just thought I'd show you the mess I've got going here. There's the box everything came in, and of course the workbench tends to get a little messy. Probably ought to keep it a little cleaner, but once you get rolling, you want to keep rolling. So I have, since there are two amplifier modules, I've gone ahead and completed one of them, because that's the next step of the process. We just in the last video we just completed the power supply module right there. And I've done a gone back and inspected it again. And here's the amplifier module. And so I'm about to construct the second of the two amplifiers, and that's going to be the subject of this video. And I'm not going to go through all the steps as in the power supply module, but I will stop at certain points where, for those who are considering building the kit or are in the process of building the kit, I'll stop at a couple of points where things get maybe a little tricky. I wouldn't say tricky, but things you want to consider before you start performing the steps. But anyway, that's what I'm going to do. So this one will go a little, probably much quicker than the power supply portion, power supply part. So this is part 5, amplifier modules. And part 5 begins with, and you'll see check marks here because I've already done one of these, begins with inserting the resistors. So we grab one of the amplifier module bags and pull out all of the resistors. That's what I'm about to do. Okay, so here are all of the resistors. They're all pretty standard looking with color codes, except for one of them. It's going to be a brown resistor, and this is a, I forget which one this is. It's a low I don't know which one that is yet, but because I don't have my glasses on, I can't read it. It's got some writing on it, but it is a resistor, and the instructions yep, it's R10, and it says in some kits the resistor may have numbers 1K, 1%. So it's a tight tolerance resistor, not 1%, 0.1%. So that's a really critical tight tolerance resistor, and it's a 1K. And but anyway, all the other resistors they look like resistors, and once again I'm going to populate the board with them using the chart and using the DVM to ensure I have the right resistor, not relying entirely on the color code. So I'll go ahead and finish that. So this is why you use the DVM. Turns out that this brown one without a color code was not the one I thought it was. It was a 20K, and there's the 20K right there, 0.1%. So that's R11, and all the rest are standard looking. So definitely use the DVM to confirm resistances for sure. Okay, just populated the resistors. Back of the board looks kind of messy, but it's time to solder. And there are two kinds of resistors. They separate them out in the manual, but they're the little 1/8 watt resistors, mostly the blue with the color code on there, and then you have the 1 watt resistors, which are the larger bodied brown colored ones, and then there's that oddball right there, that 0.1%. So time to solder. So yeah, once you get rolling, oh man, I just kicked my tripod. Once you get rolling, once you get cruising along, after having soldered, you know, over 100 joints, over 100 solder pads, you get a little better at it. You get a little quicker, but you still want to try to take your time. Then sometimes you have to end up moving leads out of the way. You see it starts to, you know, it's not really, it's kind of enjoyable, but you know, you just got to take your time. And I have found, kind of, I'll mention this in the previous video that I've touching a lead there, it's taking my heat away. You got to, I've got to avoid drinking coffee. And then I'm a lot less shaky. I think that kind of goes without saying, maybe. But that's one thing that I learned. And then keep the tip of that iron clean. And I've got these close-up glasses. I really wouldn't be able to see these small pads without them. Well, I kind of can, but I really needed the close-ups. It helps a lot. And like I mentioned, you always want to have some kind of glasses on when you're soldering. Really, I've had in the past solder either fly off the tip of the soldering iron or splatter, and this stuff, you know, is almost 700 degrees, and you can imagine solder splatter hitting the your eye. I mean, you just don't want that to happen. So when you start this kit, get on YouTube or go somewhere and learn safety techniques for soldering. I might be violating a safety technique here or there, I don't know. I just learned by trial and error. So I just go around and hit every one of them that I can. Sometimes they're tight in there. And you get to the point where you got to start cutting some soldered leads before you can get to the one next to it. It's a mess right there. Well, anyway, I figured I'd just go ahead and record a little bit. I'm not going to do this again, but just a little bit of the soldering here. And I used to have an old Archer, which is a Radio Shack brand, 15/30 watt iron. That worked fine, you know, everything, but used it for years and years and years, never really had a good soldering iron, and I always thought it would cost a lot of money to get one of those feedback irons, temperature feedback, you know, temperature controlled irons. But it really wasn't. About a year or two ago, I don't know when it was, but I got this one from Amazon, and Xtronic ESD electrostatic discharge safe, and it has functioned perfectly. And I've done a bit of soldering with it. It's never been on this long because I don't do a lot of soldering, but it's been a great purchase. And I wish I could remember how much it cost, but I don't. But I remember it being reasonable, and I remember it getting good reviews from the folks on Amazon. I always check the reviews. You're always going to get a bad review even for a good product, but the question is how many bad reviews. So I definitely recommend this one. Just because it served me so well. And it comes with a little thing, but just get a tip cleaner right here. You just shove the tip in there and pull it out, and it gets rid of the residue. Almost done. So I'm doing this just to give you an idea about how long it takes. It took to populate this board with resistors. It took about 20 minutes, but I'm taking my time. It's not a race, not a race at all. You don't want to race. You want to slow down. You want to measure every resistor with your DVM. So make sure you have the right one. I think I got them all. Now you're always going to miss one, and that's when you get down to the cutting portion. As you're cutting these leads short, you'll see the one you missed, so leave the iron going and just go back and hit that with the soldering iron before you cut it. And I see, let's see, a couple more maybe. There's one right there. And then the big leaded components, like the larger power resistors, the 1 watters, have larger leads, and they take a little longer. I mean, each of these little 1/8 watt resistors, you know, you put the soldering iron. I've got it on 700 degrees right now. I found that to be the best happy medium, because like I mentioned, I know I mentioned this before, but you don't want to leave the iron on the component for too long. Because you don't want that heat to transfer up into the resistor or component, whatever it is you're working on. So really no more than about a second to 2 seconds. So it's a compromise, and that means you don't want the heat on the iron, the temperature, to be too low. You also don't want it to be too high either. You want that happy medium, and that's the nice thing about those temperature control. Oh shit, shucks. Okay, that is one. Okay. You don't want it to be too high either, because that could result, you know, in too much heat transfer. So it's a happy medium, and you experiment and see at what point the solder starts to flow to make that joint in about a second or two. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these leads, and I'm sure I'll find one I missed. Alright, so did my cutting, and I found 3 of them that I missed. So you just leave the leads in there and redo those 3. And then when I was going back, when I did the first amplifier module, you know, you inspect and you re-inspect. And on re-inspection, I found one that I both missed, a solder joint that I missed, and I cut it too. So I think the moral of that story is re-inspect. When you're all done, and wait a day. You know, when you pick up on the kit building the next day, that's right before you get started, when your brain is fresh, your head is clear. That's the time to inspect. And the inspection is not just for missed solder joints, but also go back and look at the diodes and make sure they're placed in proper polarity, and as well as the electrolytic capacitors that are polarized, require a correct polarity. We already talked about that, but okay, so there's the resistors. And the next step, and again, here's where I'm going to start. I'm not going to repeat this soldering thing again here. I'm going to kind of go quickly from here on out. Except that I know that there are a couple of areas where I need to stop and explain things a little better, and actually one of them is next. So the next thing that's it's on the list, on the instructions, are the small capacitors and diodes. You can see here there's 3 capacitors, and these are ones that look like that. They're radial leads that look like a little egg in there. And I can tell you, because I did this, I already built one of these modules. They look like this. Okay. And they have some writing on there, but I can't see what it is. So, but I can tell you this. There are 2 of them that are 220 picofarads, and that's the ones that are packaged as a 2. And there's one of them by itself, and that's the 47. And I did confirm that by measuring it on the capacitance setting of my digital voltage meter. So I really don't think anyone can read this. I mean, maybe. It's small, and it's some of the ink on there is kind of eroded away. It's not fully there. So the good thing is you got 2 in 1, so you know which ones they are. So I'm going to go ahead and put those on. Alright, so there are 4 types of diodes that need to go in the amplifier board, and they're all listed right here. And 2 types, well, let's start out with the 1N4004s. They are easy to identify because they look like this, black plastic case, and they have 4004 right on them. And so those are easy. And then the so the BZX 79-10s, the 10 volt Zeners, they're easy to identify because they're already packaged in 3s, and there are 3 of them needed. Okay, and then the other 2 are these little glass bodied things. And there's where it gets challenging. However, they do have writing on them. And you can see V2, 6V2 on this one. So that's the 6V2. and all you have left is the other one, so it doesn't matter what the other one says, although it's a good idea to always check to make sure you have the right component. So the other one has, and it is really small, the other one's the 1N4148, and it has IC48 on it. Yeah, it has 48. So, you know, they're able to be identified, but they're tricky and you got to take your time. So I'm going to go ahead and populate the, and then there's an LED that goes in there too. I'll get to that one in a minute. Okay, so got the diodes populated except for the LED. The LED is D7, and that's D7 right there. And what the cathode, there's a little arrow pointing down, and the flat spot at the bottom, that's the cathode, and the cathode can be identified on the LED as having a flat. It's not completely round, there's a flat right there. And the cathode also has a shorter lead. So it goes into D7 just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and get the diodes soldered up. Alright, so my camera just died, and I have no idea how much I got, what was recorded on the last vid, so let me go ahead and plug this thing in. Now, I guess I'll start over. I was in the middle of something, my camera died, so I'll just start over again. Populated the board, finished with the capacitors, observing polarity, and finished putting the transistors in. They're easy. You just, you know, the transistors have flats on them, and you line those flats up with the flats on the artwork. Double checked everything, and everything looks a-okay. So now it's time to wind the output inductor, and this is where it gets a little tricky. And I actually messed it up on the first amp board. I messed it up by 1/4 of an inch. So they provide you with wire, solid wire, and it's longer than you need, so you have to cut it yourself down to 23 3/4 inches. I actually read that as 23 1/2, and I cut it 1/2 inch short, and it barely fit. So that 1/4 of an inch makes a big difference. So we're going to start. I've already cut it. I was in the process of doing that and my camera died. Battery went dead. So we're going to strip about 3/8 off of each end, and we're going to start by inserting one side into this L1A, and I'm going to give it a little bend. Get a needle nose. Get a little bend to hold it in place while we do some winding of the inductor. Okay, so I got a little bend right there. I'm going to hold it in place, and I'm going to start winding the inductor. Winding it tight, fairly tight, keeping the windings together. You can kind of push them down together when you're all done. And come all the way around, and then what you're going to have left over is going to go into L1B. So we'll give that a little bend right there, and then push that right in. And give that a bend. So that's what I have. Just like that. And that makes the output inductor. So now I'm going to go ahead and get these soldered up. Okay, good thing I keep the soldering iron burning. And the next part is this little relay, and it's a little tricky. All right. So we'll go ahead and snip the leads there for the inductor. Okay, and then you can kind of push it down. Might actually put some push it in there. It kind of wants to pop up. I might put a little piece of tape on it, or actually maybe some maybe a glue gun, a little bit of glue. Okay, so that's what it looks like. It really should be a little closer together, but I don't think it's going to make a difference. It's going to work. Okay, so having finished that, we're almost done with the amp module here. And the last part that I have, other than the mechanical, other than the LM3886 and the mechanical part, is the relay. And that got a little tricky because the leads aren't long enough to bend over and to hold it. See, that's already got, it's already got a bent lead. So make sure the leads came that way. Okay. So these leads aren't long enough to hold itself to the board while you solder, so you got to prop it up somehow. It only fits one way. And you want to make sure that when it gets soldered, it's nice and flush to the board. It's not riding up above it or tilted in any which way. So for that I used a rubber band. It doesn't say to use the rubber band in the manual, but just took the rubber band and put it over the relay. To hold it in place while it's upside down. So there's the rubber band, and it'll hold it in place while I solder one or two corners of the relay to hold it in place while I solder the rest. Okay, so I've got two corners of the relay. Take the rubber band off because it's kind of covering the areas I need to solder next, and you can see it's already flat. It's already flush, so that's a good thing. So we'll finish the relay. Alright, inspection, and there we have it. Alright, so now that we're finished with the relay, it's time for the final inspection of the circuit board. And they ask you to go over and do a double check for all of the components to make sure that the capacitors are in there properly, with observing proper polarity, as well as the diodes. And I've done that several times. Make sure all components are soldered. You know, they didn't leave one out. A lead sticking through a hole but not soldered, that can cause real problems. Alright, so now we move on to, and this is very similar to the power supply board. Okay. So we've got the heat sink, and we start out with the two. I'm always looking, I gotta make sure I'm in camera here. We've got the two brackets. We start out, you have a total of 5 screws here. You take the longer ones here, the 3/8 I think they are, and they go through the through holes, not the threaded holes, and they get screwed into there's like 2 holes here and 2 there, and they go into the inside ones, the ones closest to the center. And we're going to leave it a little bit loose. Alright. And then the circuit board goes on like that. Okay, so need that one a little bit tighter. And we used the smaller of the two, smaller of the screws right here. I guess that's 1/4 of an inch. Helps to have a magnetized screwdriver. I just pop it in there and feel around for the hole and get that one in. Alright, do the same for the other. Everything fits very well, no issues. The dimensioning and tolerancing of mechanical aspects of this has been done very well. Now here's a critical part here, and that is the LM3886. So first of all, let's remove it. And the last screw I have here is for the LM. Let's go ahead and remove it. Now, first of all, take a look at the leads and make sure none of them are bent in any weird ways. Because if they are, unbend them and straighten them out. Now, on my first LM, there was a bent lead, and I'd already put the heatsink compound on there, and I had to actually hold that in my hand while I unbent the lead. It made a big mess. So make sure the leads won't come out. Kind of stuck in there because of the way they cut this. Kind of. There we go. Slides right out. So I had to see, look at it. Okay, right there. There's a bent lead. And I didn't notice it, and so I'm trying to unbend it while the heatsink compound was on there, and it was just making a big friggin' mess. So I recommend, and this ought to be in the manual, check the leads, make sure they're not bent, and do a test fit first to see how you're going to fit it in there. Because once you get the compound in the back, you don't want to be touching this or anything else. You kind of want to hold it from the sides and do a test fit to make sure it fits. And look at that, right in there, perfect. That's how it's going to go. Alright, so I think that's pretty critical to avoid a colossal mess. Okay, so once again, we're going to put the compound I'm still working. You get 3 of these things. I'm still working on the first one, so you get more than enough. I just put a bunch on there and then take a little flat edge and evenly spread it out everywhere, and then wipe off the excess. I've already got a little bit on my finger. Very nice. Okay. Okay, now it's time to not to make a mess. Hold that like that and put the front leads in, and then it should rock right backwards into the back. Alright. Hold on, I gotta wipe this gunk off. And then now things are still kind of loose. Now we're gonna take the last screw, kind of wobble it around. You'll find the threaded hole and tighten it, but not still leave it a little bit loose. Like I tighten it down so it barely starts to tighten, and I back it off a quarter of a turn, because before you tighten the LM, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the circuit board. I'll start with the brackets. The brackets attached to the heat sink, and then go to the circuit board to the brackets, and then the LM. Alright, and last but not least is soldering the LM. Let's see if I am able to do that on camera. I'm getting all nervous. I don't want to screw it up. There it is. Those leads aren't even long enough to worry about clipping. So there we have. Check the instructions here. I think that's a completed amplifier module. And once again, do a little inspection. And we're done with the amplifier module. And now I've got 2 amplifier modules and a power supply module, and we're on to the section called wiring it all together, which I'll reserve for the next part here. Alright, so keeping everything stored back here. Here we have 2 amplifier modules and the power supply, and they are ready to go. So now it's getting, you can sort of, as you're going along here, as I'm building, I'm getting that real sense that, wow, we're getting close. Although we're not really that close, still a lot to do. But the intricate work, well, there is one more intricate thing coming up, but most of the intricate work is finished. But there is, it's wiring those RCA terminals. I've always had trouble with that. But anyway, I believe this was part 5, and I'll see you at part 6. Ciao.